Shalom, Manishma. This is about books. So, after that incident on Vashon with the kid, right, which I discussed in the timeline analysis, which untreated schizophrenia exacerbated by mental illness led me into legal trouble despite the fact that I sought mental health care from Greg Thompson of Vashon Youth and Family Services, who mysteriously failed to diagnose the guy that had self-inflicted 3 amputations with electricity, third-degree burns over 40% of my body, and a brain injury that I finally got a scan and verified like over 10 years after leaving Vashon in New Mexico. The scarring is still there. Way to go, white liberals. Way to go, Vashon. I realized that my family, I cannot rely on my family, I could not rely on the state, I could not rely on Vashonites, I could not rely on white liberals, society, atheists, Christians, nobody to help me. I had to save myself. This is how corrupt our society has become. So I started reading books. I guess we could do this in a progression, sequential progression. So the first book I came across, not the first one, but the first one that led me down this rabbit hole here, is Human Sexuality, Psychosexual Effects of Disease. I figured my, oh my god, my fucking roommate. Anyway, so I figured that the incident was a symptom of mental illness, so psychosexual effects of disease, right? I started to look up YouTube videos, what a terrible idea that was, but I did learn there was a military psychologist YouTube clip about hypersexuality as a trauma response, which for some reason Vashon never bothered with any of that, right? Never bothered to see if I was going through trauma or mental illness, even though I just fried my own hand off. Vashon is pure liars. Like, the only explanation for Vashon is either they were dumb or they were liars. And they knew that this was mental illness and deliberately deprived me of mental health care. And they knew that marijuana activates and exacerbates schizophrenia and other forms of psychosis. And so they intentionally and deliberately, strategically use that, right? To sort of push the weak off the island, perhaps? I don't know. Thin the herd. Anyway. So this book, at one point I thought maybe it was just too much testosterone with the brain damage to the frontal lobes causing a lack of frontal control, of self-control, a loss of self-control with damage to the prefrontal cortex, plus too much testosterone from sailing and exercising and all that stuff. So this book, written in Humboldt County in 1984, discusses how girls are starting their periods 1 year younger per generation. This has been documented since at least the 80s. But on this history of psychosexual medicine, the guy discusses Freud first, and then Krafft-Ebing, and Havelock Ellis, who is the uncle of Dr. Albert Ellis, whose book I have on my shelf right there. While Freud concentrated on the psyche of his patients, other early 20th century physicians concentrated their studies on genital anatomy, the effects of castration and clitoridectomy, and the utilization of mechanical devices to curb masturbation. Richard von Krafft-Ebing, a German psychiatrist who was a contemporary of Freud, chaired the initial presentation of the latter's thesis on hysteria. Krafft-Ebing had a very distasteful view of many sexual practices. As a forensic psychiatrist, he became involved with the investigation of sexual crimes, and he viewed any sexual practice other than a procreative one as perversion. He equated voyeurs, fetishists, and homosexuals with rapists and sex murderers. He also believed that transvestites were part of the same matrix. He insisted masturbation was a major factor in the etiology of the horrible crimes he studied, and he presumed that sexual desires in the elderly led to senile dementia. Krafft-Ebing probably did more disservice to the development of psychosexual medicine than any other single physician. Unfortunately, his publication, Psychopathia Sexualis, is still being read today and used as a reference book today. Now, I take that with a grain of salt, because, especially when I got this book, I had been so thoroughly screwed over by the white liberals of Vashon. I could tell this guy was a Humboldt County liberal, and so I automatically, anyone the liberals hate, I liked, because of my experience with liberals and how evil and deceptive they are. A second contemporary of Freud was Henry Havelock Ellis, who believed that each individual has a unique sexual behavior. He thought that an individual's sexuality was a result of personal attitudes and experiences. His concept of homosexuality and other less common sexual practices was that they were an extension of individual needs forged by the social environment. Needs? Thus, he expanded the parameters of so-called normal behavior. Ellis's major contributions were his strong support for sexual education, his support of equal sexual rights for women. Who has sexual rights? What? His interest in normal sexual responses, and his acceptance of childhood sexuality. That made me purchase Psychopathia Sexualis on Amazon. Unfortunately, the only one you can get there is edited to where more than 3/4 of it are missing. Fortunately, I lived on this guy's property in the South Valley, and he had this old shed full of books from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, out of print now. And he had the 1965 Library of Congress edition of Psychopathia Sexualis. This book, Krafft-Ebing originally wrote in Latin as well as the Koine Greek of his time, which I think was German. I think it was Latin and German because he was in Germany. He was in Austria. And the reason for that was you had to learn Latin to become a doctor. So it prevented the classes, the Koine Greek, right? The masses of less intelligence and less education from reading his material. And this is good because it prevented the idiotic from being upset by things they aren't intelligent enough to comprehend, and therefore rioting or, having an involuntary emotional response, which you see on Facebook all the time. What I call the Facebook mob. By coding it in Latin, he presented the Facebook mob from, chimping out, essentially. And one of his things was that he was a forensic psychiatrist for 14 years who investigated sex crimes. His job was to testify on behalf of a criminal if they were really insane or not, because a lot of guys can fake mental illness to get out of consequences. You can't fake self-inflicting 3 amputations with electricity a year prior to, hitting on a kid. So, yeah, that's so fucking annoying. That never should have happened. And I never should have got it. Anyway, the corruption of humanity is timeless. This is what's fun about reading the Old Testament and stuff, the Tanakh. Human nature is still the same as it was in the days of the Bible. People are still greedy and corrupt and just horribly backstabbing, etc. Anyway, one of his things was that homosexuality can be environmentally induced in the genetically inferior. That the genetically inferior were susceptible to psychological manipulation more than those with better genetics. They were more psychologically malleable. Through environmental manipulation, homosexuality can be environmentally induced. So and he noticed that there was a connection between homosexuals, pedophiles, transvestites, rapists, and sex murderers, as well as voyeurs and fetishists, and they had one common pathology, and that was early childhood masturbation or early childhood sexual experiences. They don't reproduce, they recruit, right? A lot of them are molested, and that had everything to do with them being gay, was they were molested by gays as kids. So if you look at modern Hollywood and America in general, children have access to pornography on the internet. Pornography consumption rates go up like 800 to 1500% after school lets out. Not work, school. So it's like the CIA, the deep state, whatever, took the stuff from this book that you can't even get on Amazon anymore. But you can find it elsewhere. If you go to search 1965 Library of Congress edition, they have earlier prints too. They're more expensive. But it's like they took the information and instead of using it to decrease homosexuality, they socially engineered an increase in LGBTQ rates, to which marijuana was a huge part of. Now that made no sense to me. Why would you do that? Why would you push drugs and porn, even in a black market, to increase LGBTQ rates as the wealthy and powerful elite that really runs society? We're not a democracy. We're a plutocracy disguised as a democracy. And then I found Jewish eugenics. Now, Jewish eugenics has a lot of interesting stuff, and one is that in the 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s, the same time Krafft Ebing was, running his clinic, there was... Weimar Berlin is a good example of this, but it's basically the Malthusian theory, right? That human beings always overpopulate, and so things like war, diseases, etc., just naturally thin the herd. So if you can artificially increase LGBTQ rates, that is a form of eugenics, because it lowers the birth rate. It's differential fertility rates instead of differential mortality rates. And that made a lot more sense. So if you look at Maleficent 2, Angelina Jolie has big, busty boobs. And this is a kid's movie. And there's that black guy who was in the Firefly movie, but he was also in like some transgender cross-dressing movie. But it's almost like it's like black.com, right? It's like soft porn for kids. That's what Hollywood is. And so companies like Google and Microsoft are activating the sexual instinct in children, deliver parental restrictions, and Hollywood, etc. And this is eugenics, of course. This goes along with the accelerated puberty hypothesis, which was described in that first book. We're seeing this a lot in the United States and Western countries. Girls are starting their periods not just younger and younger ages. I mean, 6 to 8 years old. The menses. And this is by design. And when they're also experiencing earlier sexual introduction. And the most common statistics with that is girls that lose their virginity early tend to have lower success in life, lower achievement, lower success at marriage, etc. There is a lot of destructive impacts from what the elites are doing, and they don't care at all about the lives they destroy, lives like mine. These are the eggs they break to have their omelet. But it doesn't make any sense, because if this is the case and the world is overpopulated, why didn't they just let COVID run free and keep it quiet? Stay quiet about it, right? Don't quarantine people. Don't do the social distancing and the masks. Let it thin the herd of the smokers and the overweight. Why not? Why not let AIDS reduce the carbon footprint? If global warming is caused by overpopulation, then population reduction is a better alternative to outright extinction. Isn't that our argument for cigarettes being legal? Thin the herd, right? Eugenics in more ways than one. Electronic devices, pornography, etc. And I couldn't figure out why the church didn't resist this. Because this is very powerful agenda implementation strategies here. Shouldn't there have been some sort of bastion of resistance against the socially engineered transformation of the United States, which is coinciding with a moral decline? But it's not a decline, it's a shift. because now you have a lot of Muslim immigrants who are more moral than the once Christian indigenous population of the United States. What a wild time that I was born in. But then I bought this book, Darwin's Cathedral. Don't judge a book by its cover. I haven't finished this one yet either. So many books to read, and so many more that I want to read. Darwin's Cathedral discusses how a moral system that governs a population, right, a moral governing system of a population, is open-ended and can be changed through cultural evolution. So genetic evolution and cultural evolution are integrated. Therefore, if you evolve the culture, you can change the laws that govern a population of that culture. So who are the engineers of culture? The same people who do the Netflix and the Hollywood and the rap and all that? Yeah, those are the engineers of culture. Just Google, Microsoft, people who own Facebook, run Facebook, etc. So this discusses evolutionary traits of churches and groups as single organisms. And it's really interesting because this really identifies the social control mechanism factor of Christianity and other religions, but particularly Christianity. And so the church wasn't a resistance to the moral decline of the United States, which was part of immigration, etc., right? Like, this is all cultivated. Not you particularly, but the elite lowered the birth rate of the native white population and just the native population in general. Oh yeah, also Race, Evolution, Behavior by Philip Rushton. It's really good. But they cultivated this exact circumstance. They are the architects of this circumstance. And they, therefore, by socially engineering a decline in the birth rate with marijuana and pornography and other drugs, of course, marijuana is like Miracle-Gro for the porn industry and the fentanyl industry, etc. They created a need for demographic replacement. They literally, we got to replace the declining birth rate population. Well, the Amish aren't really declining the birth rate, and they don't really have high rates of drug use or pornography consumption. And that's what gets really interesting. Is just now I was in the bath and I was thinking about Israel and Gaza. Now, if there is a connection between behavior and circumstances with divine intervention, one of the lessons from Vashon is God should punish Vashon for its immorality. Instead, Vashon's wealth is contingent on its immorality. No successful drug dealer is successful if they let moral and ethical boundaries stand between them and profit. And this explains Vashon and the United States and capitalism in general, especially white capitalism, be it Christian or atheist, whatever. Profit over ethics. So if Gaza had lower rates of marijuana consumption, pornography, infidelity, homosexuality, etc., then shouldn't God be rewarding them for being righteous? Because I'm going to guess that Israel had much higher rates of prostitution, drug and alcohol consumption, pornography consumption, homosexuality, infidelity, polygamy, even polyamory. Guarantee that's probably a small thing, maybe a big thing, I don't know, but more so in Israel than Gaza. And yet, the wealth factor is not what it should be. Right? Like, if I just don't sin, then bad things shouldn't happen if there's a connection between behavior and circumstance that goes in this, like, what is just and right versus what is realistic. Food for thought.